a bit of an addition. Today I wanted to create an addition to the introduction, and I do believe that this will be of great use to you. Even though there's nothing technical in this tutorial, uh, there is a bit of a motivation embedded into it. Basically, here I wanted to deal with the subject, why should anybody learn how to use Linux, or why should anybody learn how to use Red Hat or get their certification or anything of a kind? Well, here's why. You might have this idea that most of the world runs either on Windows or on Mac, but that is simply not the case. If you just take a look at Google, at Facebook, at Twitter, at eBay, at PayPal, all these servers, all these companies, they pretty much completely run on Linux. I'm not sure about eBay, but like 99% sure that it runs on Linux as well. All of these companies, they are the biggest companies, one of the biggest companies on the planet, and they all run on Linux. All of their machines are Linux, all of their servers are running Linux. And if you want to get a job with any of those companies as as a technical person or anything of a kind, you will need to know uh, a great deal about Linux, because pretty much the entire Google development team, the entire not the team, the entire Google development platform is actually on a Linux machines, all of it. Even though the employees can bring their own computers into the company that can have any operating system installed on them, the main OS which they use as a platform for development is actually Linux. They use a version of Ubuntu that they've adapted to their own needs. Anyway, uh, as I said, if you take a look at Facebook as well, all of their servers from beginning till this day on today, they run on Linux. But okay, that might still not be enough for you. You might still think, oh well, there is bound to be something else. There's bound to be something more other than those few companies. Well, let me tell you something. All of your Android phones that you have, that you carry in your pockets, or that you see on television or whatever, they all run on Linux as well. Your smart TVs run on Linux. I don't know what else do you need, basically. Even though the desktop computers, till this day on today, most of the desktop computers do run on Windows, and the market share is pretty low there. For Linux, that is nothing. Just imagine all the Android phones, they run on Linux. All the major companies run on Linux. Pretty much a large, I mean not all, but certainly a very large portion of servers, like 90% of them in the world, run on Linux-based systems. Your routers, pretty much all routers, they run on Linux as well. Be it your home router or your Cisco router, or they don't necessarily need to run directly on Linux, but they run on a derivative of a Linux. Cisco routers, Juniper routers, the commands on the Juniper router are pretty much the same as within a Linux terminal. The environment is very similar. That's fantastic for me and for a lot of people out there. And even the desktop is slowly being taken over by Linux, more so in the recent years than in the past. Why so? Well, first of all, it's completely free. Most of it anyway. If you want to, in certain cases, only if you want support, you pay. Only if you want like professional support or something of a kind, then you pay for that support. You subscribe or something of a kind. But the operating system in and of itself is free. You just go onto the net, download it, and run it. That's one of the reasons. The second reason is, although this might not be the case to the greatest of extents with Windows 8.1, uh, Windows is, well, not Windows, but sorry, Linux is generally far more secure than any Windows or Mac-based operating system. Why? Well, one of the main reasons, I suppose, is the fact that it's less used for desktop, so therefore there is less interest to develop viruses and something of a kind. However, that is not the only case for it. I mean, okay, yeah, true. there are pretty much no viruses out there for Linux-based operating system. There are a few antivirus systems for it, but they're generally not used primarily because the system itself is very secure. So even if you were to download a virus as a regular user from the net or something of a kind, to install anything, you require root privileges. So even though it's sitting there on your computer, it won't be able to do anything. Security is a major part of Linux. You won't have any problems with viruses. Your system will be very secure, provided, of course, that you at least configure it properly to a good extent. However, desktop users, people who just browse, who use a browser mainly, nothing else pretty much, actually Linux would be perfect for them, but they tend to use Windows primarily because they are used to it. In Linux, you never have to see the terminal if you do not want to. I use the terminal. People in the business use the terminals always. Even desktop users use the terminals primarily because you can get things done a lot faster, and the true power rests there in the blessed terminal. However, if you don't want to, as a desktop user, you will never have to use it. It will not be a requirement. But I just wanted to make this very brief video just to show everybody and explain that most of the world out there is actually, most of the appliances, most of the devices out there in the world, network devices, computers, servers, etc., supercomputers are run on Linux. Pretty much all the supercomputers are run on Linux-based operating systems or on the Linux that we know and use in our daily lives today. Plus, as I said, as I've mentioned previously, Windows and Mac do cost money to buy, while you can do pretty much everything and more with Linux-based operating systems without paying a cent. I mean, completely free. Although you will encounter some problems inevitably with applications. For example, Adobe Suite, Adobe Photoshop, or something of a kind will generally not work on Linux. Even with compatibility layer wine, you're going to have problems and it's not going to work there. So in the application section for desktop, it's still lacking a little bit. Also in sense of for gamers, okay, so Linux is definitely not for gamers. Uh, I mean, if you're an average gamer who doesn't actually require super performance, like to set everything to max out settings on graphics and stuff like that, you'll be able to run most of the games without any problems on medium settings or something like that. With a compatibility layer, you won't need to download anything specific for Linux. You can just download a Windows game and run it on Linux with Wine without bigger problems. Most of the things will run. Sometimes you will encounter some problems, but most of the time it will run. So those are the two problems that Linux encounters, but I just wanted to show this picture to you, as I have already stated, that most of the world, most of the businesses, most of the places where you can get a job, where you can work, they actually run on Linux-based operating systems, banks especially. Maybe not the bank's computers like the one that you see when you walk to the reception, but the infrastructure of the bank, their servers, and the stock market especially. So the stock market in New York, the pretty much all of the servers there are on a Linux system. And that is what I want to show you, that most of the world runs on Linux, that is where you can find jobs. I'm not saying that you cannot find jobs with Microsoft or with Windows or something of a kind, but you are far more likely to find something with Linux, even though it's a free operating system, because companies do use it. They do need people to actually operate it and to do stuff with it. If you possess the knowledge, you definitely have a better opportunity, a better chance out there to be employed, to find work, and to make an income. Aside from that, Linux is highly customizable. There is pretty much nothing that you cannot do, primarily because it's open source, and you get a variety of desktop versions for it. So let's say you want to download Fedora, which is an open source Red Hat free distribution for desktop users. Basic